Welcome everyone on this new episode of Let's Talk. I'm super happy to be here today with Peter Gostev. Peter, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good. Very good. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm super excited to have you on the show. I have a few questions, but maybe for the people who might not know you, if you would have to introduce yourself in a few words, how would that be?
Yeah, sure. So I work for Moonpig. So Moonpig is a organization. It's basically e-commerce, but we focus on greeting cards and gifts. And I lead the AI section capability there. So I've only been there for about 8 months, and before that I was at NatWest for I think some like 5-6 years. And prior to that, I was in consulting and a few other companies.
Awesome, amazing. So I think I have two follow-up questions. That the first one is your state of the art. So right now, actually working at Moonpig, what are you excited about? What are you excited about regarding what you're working on? And yeah, what drives you today? Your state of the art. You get the idea.
Yeah, so I think the cool thing about a company like Moonpig is that we're a very good size to not be too obsessed with having to ensure that we definitely get some AI features working, like AI startup works, right? They're completely reliant on that. But we are also not big enough, like, for example, like the bank where I used to work before, where you have to be extremely careful what you deploy because it actually impacts millions of people and their finances and so on. So we're in a fortunate position that we can really try things out and experiment with new ideas. So the way I approach it, and it kind of links to what I'm excited about as well, is that I've got a portfolio of different kinds of initiatives. So some are really focused on just getting things done and delivering value. So one example is we've got some operational processes that we picked out that could be the size of kind of couple of people who are working on them. But we can actually apply LLMs and just automate them and basically free those people up to do something better. So that's one kind of capability that I'm particularly excited about, because the reason why I'm excited about them is that you can actually get them working like in a few weeks. Like that's a kind of thing that really you couldn't do before. And the second type is more experimental features that we can maybe put towards our customers. Maybe something that completely could create a new capability internally that we couldn't have before, but they're a little bit unclear how well they're going to work. So for us, image models fall within that kind of category. So within greeting cards and gifts, that certainly could be a big game changer for us if we get that right. But also even for internal processes, using like vision models to analyze some imagery and create new text that we could use for search. Like that kind of thing is pretty cool that we're experimenting with as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I have many questions on that. Maybe just before diving in all these amazing topics, I'd love to do a background check. So if you can share with us maybe some key moments. I don't know if since university or wherever you find whatever you can share and want to share, but it would be super interesting to have some key moments through your journey, through your career, that you've learned a few things from, and that we can also learn a few things from.
Yeah, sure. I think there were definitely a few. So one of the ones where I probably learned quite a lot about thinking about problems in a structured way, presenting them in a way that people can instantly get, was I was working in Edinburgh in Scotland, and for a bank, but it was a kind of insurance arm of the bank. And then there I was working in the strategy team, and the key goal of our work to really present ideas really clearly. So that was, I think, just the craft that goes into how do you actually tell a story in the right way. I think it maybe people don't appreciate like how much effort goes into some of those kind of presentations, or I don't know, new ideas even if it's like a budget discussion or something like that. So that was quite useful. And well, that's not my job anymore. It's still like day to day. That's kind of what I have to do anyway. And I think people, whether you work in product, whether you engineer, I think these kinds of things are still useful to be able to tell a story well in a succinct, crisp way. And actually, whenever I write something externally, that's what I do as well. Like I just think of some concept, how I can visually tell the story about something, and it could be just like one imagery, and then hopefully like people get something out of it that they couldn't have seen before. So I'd say that was probably my biggest training ground, because sometimes it would be something that needs to go to the board or needs to go to our executive leadership, and like it has to be right. So yeah, that was probably one. There was another as well when I was working at the startup for a little bit, and there was just where we needed to create a whole analytics team, basically pretty much from scratch. So just getting into the weeds of everything from, I know, creating dashboards to looking to at the API spec to like trying out new suppliers for different, I don't know, data pipelines, to actually trying to create some kind of light models or something like that. So that's all doing all of that from kind of a matter of a few weeks. I think that was quite interesting. And also maybe before Moonpig, and I guess maybe we can talk about Moonpig later, but before Moonpig as well, that was the last year when I was there with Generative AI. There was such an extreme level of interest in this within the bank, that it just completely took over all of my working life. So sometimes I would have days where I would have maybe 3 presentations to different teams about generative AI, which all require preparation, maybe slight customization, maybe it will be some brainstorming or something like that. All across from customer service teams to some executive teams, finance teams, whatever it might be. So that was really crazy, and just staying on top of this and thinking about how do we talk to different people, how do we identify different opportunities, how to also stay on top of what's around, or how do we think about kind of crafting a bit of a strategy to our approach. That was also pretty interesting. I think helped me maybe craft iron out my thinking in that space as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. There are many things I would like to ask you. I think I'd love also to talk about models and how do you stay up to date? How do you train? How do you keep learning in this very fast-growing environment? Maybe I would love to ask you first about creating a data and analytics team, and iterating through finding value. So do you have quite a lot of experience with that? How would you approach it from your experience if you had to start over today? Maybe key components of building a team. And then while doing so, because one needs to go with the other, how do you keep reinventing the testing new opportunities, trying to think about them, understanding problems? The funny thing is the problem doesn't seem to change much, but the way we approach them with evolution of technology is what is interesting. So how would you grow a team from scratch in data analytics, and how do you go about the offering and finding new value propositions for the different industry you've worked in?
Yeah, maybe if I slightly change your question, just because I think I can give more interesting answer, is not in terms of the data analytics team, because I think some of those teams could be quite operational, and I think maybe dynamics they're a little bit different. But I had a few times when I was part of teams, either starting teams or being part of like early in the journey of those teams, where it's generally innovation kind of teams. And right now I'm focused obviously on AI. Before it was more, and by AI I mean here there's a kind of latest wave of AI, so generative models pretty much. And in my previous team at NatWest, I was fairly early in a team that was that's job was to basically introduce supervised machine learning ish. That was probably like 80% of the scope, and then generally kind of data based projects. And the interesting thing in all of those, both of those teams and some of the previous teams I worked at, is that it was a combination of trying to paint the picture of what would paint the vision of what the world could be if we did all of those great things, but also actually delivering value in the short term. So, and also balancing both of that. And I would say one of the hardest things to do is to actually get these kinds of maybe innovation projects on the backlog of the teams who you want to collaborate with. So you don't really want to do these innovation projects completely independently, because a lot of the time they're probably not actually going to have any impact. And I think maybe if you go back 10 years, I think a lot of innovation teams were set up like this, where you just have a separate innovation team, you do some innovation separately, and then you kind of hope to seed it back into the organization. And like maybe some teams have done it well. I haven't seen it personally work particularly well. So what we're trying to do at NatWest, what I'm doing now at Moonpig, is that it's much more from set up the team, experiment, maybe by experiment, maybe do like very quick experiments, do quick prototypes, then partner with the team who actually owns this problem, and then try and get in front of them and work with them to deliver it. And this is, I don't think there's like one real answer of one way of doing it, but it's basically my approach right now with generative AI is that there's a path to doing experiments and demos really quickly. So it's much more powerful to just create an experiment, a demo, then talk about it. So if we can speak to a team about the problem, come back 2 days later, here's a prototype, that at least makes it real and people get excited about that and they believe it more. Now, obviously, demo and reality is not the same thing. Like there's a massive difference between those two, but at least that's a path, I think, to getting people bought in. But beyond that, it's a kind of normal stakeholder management stuff. Work with people on their backlog, see whether we can change some prioritization, see if they need some extra resource, more budget, or communicate the benefits. All of these kinds of things that apply to any kind of other project anyway. But there's not, you kind of have to keep going. I think a lot of the time, people don't really have space, even if they like what you're doing, they just don't have space to do the extra bits.
Right. Yeah. And the more credentials you get and the more success you get, the more credibility and power you can leverage. Interesting. So I think that I would be very curious about exploring use cases. So you mentioned the classical AI route. I would call it old school, which is basically supervised and supervised learning, and all those things, XGBoost, and all of that. And so because you are working on the edge of Gen AI and those very unique use cases, I want you to have your stake on how do you see use cases and how do you see Gen AI potential? So maybe having your vision on use cases that uses classical machine learning or classical AI, and use cases that uses Gen AI, and maybe the edge or your expertise on the line there. And do you just still consider tackling some problems with classical AI? I don't know if it's the right way to put it, but I'm sure you have some valuable insights regarding that.
Yeah, so the way I think about it now and the way we organize it at Moonpig is that we have two separate teams. So we've got a data science team, and there are also other data teams such as MLOps teams, at data engineering and so on. And their job doesn't change a lot. So they can benefit from some of the Gen AI tools, but there's still plenty of use cases to just do via more traditional ways. such as if you want to do recommendations or you want to do some personalization, you want to do, I know, a search, maybe some kind of performance marketing or things like that. There's a lot of times when you just need the traditional classical techniques that work, that are just the right tools. And I would say this might be not 100% strictly true all of the time, but basically when you have structured data, it's probably better to just use traditional data science techniques. And when you have unstructured data, that's typically more a language model kind of activity, or a vision model or image model or whatever it might be. So that's probably like a simple way I think about it. And then there are definitely some exceptions, and I think you can kind of blur the lines a little bit, such as one of the applications that I think is maybe a little bit underappreciated of GenAI for data science is basically use LLMs or vision models for enriching the data that you have. Yeah, so it's like you can generate synthetic data, or for example, if you've got some data but you need to like clean it up or build up some features based off that data, you can totally do this. Like I haven't tried this like a lot apart from just toy examples, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. So, for example, if you've got some, I don't know, different products or something like this that customers bought, and you just want to group them in certain ways that is like a little bit fuzzy. Like, why not use LLMs to group those products in kind of ways that you would find meaningful? I think that would be probably better than using kind of data engineering techniques that others would apply. So I think there's a lot of other ideas we can use kind of on the edges, but I think that kind of structured, unstructured data is a reasonable divide of the approaches we can take. And for then Gen AI kind of use cases, the way I really see it is that I don't want machine learning people wasting their skills and knowledge to call an API. That it just feels like a waste. It's not fun for them. That's not what they are skilled at. And it's not what you need. So I think generally the way I think about it is that it's primarily software, but just with AI capabilities in it. So most of what we want to build is just good software. And then it's just new types of software that you couldn't build before, or you had to have a team of data scientists kind of building that. So that's how I think about it. And whether it's an internal process that gets automated, or it's a completely new user-facing feature, we would actually build it like any normal software. We have software engineers, designers, product managers, and that's just part of it. And that's why I think there is the way we organize it. I run a separate team. So, and the reason for that, the reason why it's not like rolled up into data or not part of technology directly, is that I think there's still benefit, at least in the short term, to have a team that specifically specializes on this new tech, just because it's a little bit complicated. You need to have new kind of intuition for it. It changes way too much for just a software engineer to know everything about everything. So I think it's a good idea to have a few people who specialize on that particular topic, and then they can go and partner up with other teams to help them build better software.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, and I really like how you frame it. To me, data engineering, software engineering, with a few tweaks, because those LLM, they have inference to take into account, and like ways of scaling, and like FinOps and keeping track of the cost is the interesting part that I guess everyone's figuring out. Like those zeros that are adding up to AWS. I don't know. But I really like how you see it, and how you. I would really like to know a bit more if you have some examples of use cases that you can share where you leverage Gen AI capabilities that you've seen value. For example, in e-commerce, but maybe like some intuitions that you have for the banking industry or other use cases that you might have heard of that have caught your attention? Do you have some examples?
Yeah, so I would say one very good area to look at is unstructured data that an organization has. So one example could be conversations with customers. So it's either calls or chats, just some kind of unstructured data. So you can do a few things with that. So one is you can just help your customer service agents just improve their performance in some way. So it could be that you could have a suggested response, or you could have some example conversations that you just automate away because they're simple enough to automate now. So that's kind of one. Operational efficiency is one part of this. Then another part is that we can now analyze all of these conversations at scale. And you mentioned that the zeros are adding up. I would say that the cost of LLMs is so drastically lower than it used to be. If you go back about, let's say, about like October last year, let's say, the best model we had around was GPT-4. It used to cost $30 per input, $60 output. Now, I'm going to say this from memory, so I could be slightly wrong. Then in November, they released the GPT-4 Turbo, which was $10 input, $30 output. Then they released GPT-4o, which was, what was it, May or something like this year. And that was $5 input, $15 output. So we already went from 30 to 5, if you look at input. Then they had another model, which was, I think, they released it in like July or August, that was actually half that price nearly. I think it was something like $2.50 input. So again, even lower. And then they've got GPT-4 Mini, which, okay, is a different kind of model. And it's something like, I think it's something like 15 cents input. So we went, if you had like a use case, maybe doesn't require the most complexity, then you can do it for 15 cents input. And if you calculate how much that will cost you to process all of your conversations that you have in a year, like depending on the size of your business, I think I was doing some calculations. I think you can do something like 1 million conversations for $500. So that kind of level. So suddenly, what that means, right? So I would say the cost of it is irrelevant. It's a cost of like hiring a contractor for one day. I mean, even less. So I would say cost is irrelevant. Then if we think about what information is contained with this, we've got few kinds of categories of information. So one is, what are my customers talking about? So it could be, do they mention some bugs? Do they mention some payment issues or something like that? So that could be one thing that if you can flag this up quickly, could save you money straight away. Then there could be some, problems with the product that you wouldn't pick up otherwise. So that could also be kind of longer term things to resolve. Then you can also look at it as the quality of conversations that your agents are having. So customer service, quite a tough job. So there's a high turnover. So actually to understand whether your agent's not doing a very good job quickly is a good idea. So you can actually solve some of the customer service issues that way. Then you can also, for example, one idea I really like is that NPS is something I think most companies measure, but you normally get 1% of customers to tell you what the NPS score they would give you, like at best. But actually now you can use LLMs to just estimate NPS for every single conversation that you have. So, okay, it's an estimate. From kind of my rough benchmarking, I think LLMs kind of have good judgment in that space. And now suddenly you can go to 100% coverage. So you can track complete NPS for every single agent, for every single product, for every single geography, just live. And I think that that could be extremely powerful, that you can actually use that MI that you never had before. So that's a kind of, and there are more things you can get out of this. But my point is that that's something that you really could have never had before, and now you just have it at the flip of the switch. So you could just have that. So for complicated scenarios, which will take more work, but you can also do things like compliance with the, I don't know, if you're like a mortgage seller, you can now analyze them for compliance, adherence to some policies. Like, so there are more complicated things you can do. Yeah, and I think um, I would say if someone's looking for use cases, just look at what unstructured data you have, and transcripts. Maybe I'm thinking something like user logs. So as customers go around the website, the app, you basically log what they're doing, and then you could analyze that and see what kind of experiences people are having. Right now, the measurements are quite clunky, right? You can measure like conversion, but I wonder, can you measure to say how many customers struggle to find the right product, right? That's kind of a more slightly less clear category of what that means. But I think you can use LLMs to basically try and guesstimate how many people they were, and then you can try and improve that. So hopefully it gives you just more MI to make your product better. Yeah, and then there are other ways, other areas of unstructured data. So images was a nice area for us. So I mean, greeting cards obviously very visual. So analyzing that, tagging it better, enriching the data we have for things like, I know, search and creating alt text or like things like that. There's a bunch of things around those areas that I think are very productive.
Amazing. You mentioned multiple points. So I think that I really like the visibilities that you shared on the cost and on the possible use cases. E-commerce is very interesting for Gen AI, like you mentioned at the beginning. I can think of a lot of ways to approach many problems. I really agree. These tools are amazing to enhance capabilities in data engineering pipelines and add more data and train better models or understand better things that would require reasoning. So I guess I'm curious about agentic systems. So I think of two main category of agentic systems. The first one is like purely it has an objective and it has tools and it can iterate to try to achieve that objective. And the second one, I would just add a voice on top of it. So you were mentioning customer support. So yeah, you can just interact with it. Or maybe you want to onboard new people. You can have an AI voice that is trained on the company's data and that can really assist this person. So how do you approach agentic system in general? And do you have maybe some insights or things that you're excited about?
Yeah, so I think agentic systems, I think it's a difficult topic because I think a lot of people mean many different things by agents. What helps me is basically just ignore the idea of agents and just think about it as like bits of software that we need to build. So, for example, when we are working on one of our projects, we originally just started with one prompt, right? So that was like, you wouldn't call one prompt an agent, right? Then we had to put in, break it up in three to help it kind of understand it a little bit better. I know, would you call that an agent? I don't know, probably doesn't quite feel agentic. Then we have like a router, so which helps you direct from, maybe set it on different paths to go via this direction, that direction. And I don't know if you would call it an agent. I probably wouldn't call this an agent, but the essence of it was to just, it's really just engineering to make the problem solvable. And if I was trying to approach this as a, like, let's instruct an agent that will do this, I don't know if we would have just tried to adhere to some kind of imagined agentic standards too much and actually not solve the problem very well, or try to. And I think the issue there is that maybe we assume too much capability and then we try and kind of set it up in a way that just does things by itself. But essentially, it is kind of stitching prompts together and prompting things well. So that's maybe, and I appreciate my example is quite simple, and we are working in basically kind of one dimension of, we've got some inputs, we need to make some decisions and get some output. So maybe it's quite simple. I think if we look at something like coding agents, so software engineering agents, and I think they do feel agentic, maybe in the sense that they do go interact with different systems, they read the document, then they, I don't know, search the internet, and then they bring things together in there and in the IDE, and then they solve the problem and so on. And I think that's a kind of thing that would be really cool if it worked. But right now, I have no trust in them yet. And I think it's one of those things that it's a little bit like, I don't know, maybe we can think of driverless cars as kind of big, important agents that drive cars. And the idea there is that we want to set them up in such a way that they could just drive. And I think the threshold of when you can actually allow some more sophisticated system to just do its job, I think is extremely high. And one example I'll give, we're thinking about how much automation we can do in customer service. And one reality is that an agent can always go and ask their manager about an issue, and an agent can't really do that. I guess you can kind of set it up, maybe it like differs to a human, but then it kind of slightly defeats the problem if you actually want to automate it at the high level. So yeah, you have to make it perfect, almost. So, and I think it's tough. And I personally don't really want to spend a lot of time thinking about how I create autonomous agents, and I just want to focus on solving specific use cases. And then if it happens to be agentic, or someone can define it agentic, then it's maybe kind of an accident that it kind of worked out that way. But I want to just focus on solving the problem.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah. When I think of agents in general, the top use cases that comes to mind would be customer service. I don't know, let's say you're in a web and you know this little chatbot that you have on the bottom at the right. Well, one use case that I really enjoyed that I liked is that I can ask something to that bot, either through chat or with my voice, and then it will highlight specific part of the front to guide me, or maybe it will redirect me to the page. And so like it understood my query, and it not only answered me like a rag would, and yeah, okay, I searched the database and I'm telling you this. No, it like searched, knew what I was looking for, but then took a series of actions that highlighted specific parts or redirected me to a specific page with the highlight in the UI, you know? And so this is to me like super interesting, because we're like getting to the edge of, we're getting out of the chatbots and we're getting into these multimodal capabilities. And when I think of the agents, it's like using tools. But like you mentioned, there are so many things to do that have tremendous amount of value, can reduce costs, improve customer experience, that doesn't require an agentic system. That I totally get your point in what you were mentioning. Maybe some other use cases. Yeah, you have the voice, like, I don't know, making AI calls customer to make sure everything is all right, and like having all that at scale. And then you can look at the transcripts, you can analyze them with processes. This seems interesting.
Yeah, maybe one thing your example that you gave about the kind of UI highlighting the right areas, I think this is really interesting example. And that's probably one category that I feel like has really been underused, underexplored. is a general category of just UI innovation, uh, and uh, and I think there's so much we can do in this space. Like I like voice as well. So, for example, I could imagine having, let's say, like, I know, clothing website where you could have some kind of voice interaction where it doesn't even have to speak to you, but you just speak to it and say, "Oh, these t-shirts look a bit bright," and it just does a search and shows you less bright t-shirts, and then you can say, "Oh no, they look a bit too boring," so it does another search, and you could just interact with it, and it could just keep, like, be a little bit of an assistant. And right now, you have to, when you shop, you have to think about what do I like, what do I want. I need to go and like type in a search or go to another category. There's a lot of brain work you need to do to achieve kind of the same thing. So I think that's a really category that I'm very interested in, and my general, I know, kind of wish slash prediction is that I think we should see a lot more of this kind of innovation. That should not, I think for me, the criteria is that we should not brand it as AI, and people shouldn't think of it as AI, but it's just something that works so much better, and you just don't think about it. And it's cool that that's value to you, and you don't have to think which AI thing I'm using.
Agreed. Yeah, AI is the biggest buzzword ever. Yeah, one way, because I think that we have so much room for improvement in terms of, I don't know, I'll take the e-commerce examples. When we're buying things, we buy on a lot of time emotional drivers, and a lot of time we don't know what we are looking for, or like it's like I have problems but I'm not aware of them, and until I'm not conscious that I have this problem, I won't be able to fix it. Well, maybe in the same way, I'm looking for something but I'm not sure. So like, I'm not sure what it is, but I know that when I see it, I recognize it. You know that feeling? And so if I were to guide, like, I don't know, I connect to a website, it's like, hey Thomas, what are we buying today? What are you looking for? And I'm like, I don't know, I need a pen, but but I'm not sure how to decide, blah blah blah. And then you can say, okay, so based on your site and your personal information, a lot of people are really liking that pen. Here's a photo of it, and this is the price. How does that feel to you? I don't know. I think we can really reinvent the way we consume. Don't want to sound like to uh, to reinventing the wheel, no. But I'm pretty sure that there are things that are available right now, consumer side, that are that can work. Like we don't need a new model. We don't need lower prices. I think it's just going from the B2B to the B2C. And a lot of applications right now were really on the B2B side because B2C might be scary, or scaling the things haven't been done yet. But I really think that we can do amazing things. Do you have some thoughts, or do you want to react to that?
Yeah. So yeah, I totally see, like, if you we've been through this before, right? So we have seen, if you look at the examples of the famous stories about, for example, when electricity was introduced to factories, it actually took them like a few decades to actually benefit from this, because to actually benefit from this, they needed to restructure the factory floors because everything was built around steam and like big centralized machinery, and now they could actually plug it into kind of all the walls and so on, simplifying it massively. But the point is that you actually had to make big infrastructure changes to benefit from it. Then if you look at examples of um, the ads that first appeared in on the internet, they really felt like newspaper ads, where you just kind of stick them onto the side, and people would read, I don't know, sports, and there's some beer ad or something like that on the side. That's it. and they didn't really convert very well. And people said, "Oh well, the internet is stupid, not going to make anyone any money." And then we have Google Ads, which is just a printing machine. We have Facebook Ads, which also another printing machine, and they just invented much more native ways to advertise. And it's a kind of very hyper personalized ads for Facebook, and very relevant to your searches ads for Google. And I think but that took how many years? Like, I don't know the dates now, but it probably took about like 15, 20 years for us to get from the dumbest ads that didn't work to like the ads that just printed money. So I think it's a kind of, we should, I hope it'll be quicker than that, but I think there's a kind of expectation we should have as well, that I think there's some criticism around like AI tools that may be just hypey and so on, which I think is probably right in the short term, but it doesn't mean to say that there's nothing to be invented that is actually long term. And I think we'll probably go through a wave of just people trying to do the same thing, but with AI, and that will be a down wave, and we'll kind of get over that hopefully. And then there'll be a wave of people actually thinking about it differently and inventing new things that just completely like reimagine the way we would actually interact with it. And it will take time because people don't have intuition for like exactly what will work. And even if you listen to like the CEOs of tech companies and people who are really deep into this, they don't know either, right? No one knows. And I don't think we should be arrogant to say, yes, that's what it will be like. But it feels like it would probably be something along the lines of, we actually have to change the way we do things quite a bit before we actually see the real benefits.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So I'd love to ask you about leaderboards, LLMs, latest models, and maybe, jailbreaking models and things. So how do you go about learning? This is a very fast evolving field. How do you go about learning the latest models, and how do you go about using them for your use cases? Which one do you pick? How do you deploy them? Infrastructure? Do you have some comments around that?
Yeah, so I would say that there are probably kind of two realities of just keeping up with the latest models and trying to test them out and so on, and what we use in practice. And I would say generally, like we use OpenAI models pretty much completely. But if I know you don't have access to OpenAI models and you only have access to Anthropic models, that's totally cool. Like, or only Google models, that's totally cool as well. I think if you're between those three, like it probably doesn't matter that much. And there's some nuances about which ones are better at what and so on, but you can kind of swap them in and out. I don't think it like matters massively. And then there are some like developer friendliness differences. And I think OpenAI has been particularly good at that in terms of having a really nice way to interact with their models. They've got embeddings models, they've got vector database, they've got vision models, audio models, like everything is there and you can manage it nicely. They've got really nice rate limits. Like all of this is there. So that's why I like using them. But yeah, as I said, if you only have access to Anthropic models, that's cool as well. They're really good models. So that's probably the basics of kind of using those models. Then in terms of keeping up with the latest models, the important part there is, well, day to day, it probably doesn't matter. Like, so I think that probably it's worth paying attention to what OpenAI does, what Anthropic does, and what Google does. Others kind of, maybe you can kind of ignore them unless they do something amazing. So that's probably kind of the basic point. Then important thing, if you want to, and that you don't have to, is that the useful thing about, I would actually extend it to pretty much all AI tools, is that it's really easy to try them. Like you don't need to, I don't know, quite often you don't even need an account, and you can just go and try and play with the models. The LMC's chatbot arena is great to get some intuition about different models. And then every time I go and like spend time on the chatbot arena, I learn something about the models. Because sometimes like you hear about, or like fine models are really good, or like, oh, Llama 8B is such a good model, it's amazing. And then you go and actually chat is like, oh yeah, no, it's not. Like, yeah, it's like, okay, maybe it's good for some like narrow use cases, and maybe it is, but generally, like, it's not a great model. Like, maybe it's good for 8B, but it's not great. Like, so you can kind of, but that's my opinion. Other people might have other opinions. So, um, and I would say Serena, there's a leaderboard, and you can see their ratings, and it's it's kind of slightly tricky. I think people criticize it a lot and say, "Oh, it's just human preferences and so on." I don't really agree with that. I think it's not as superficial as it sounds. Human preferences, like I would run tests and I would see which one gave me the right answer, and I would prefer the right answer. So I don't think it's superficial. I think there are some superficial elements where it's quite hard to distinguish um, for certain questions which model actually gave a better answer. Maybe it's both correct. So I'd say our benchmarks are just not good enough to kind of track this. But I would say to first approximation, it's a reasonable benchmark. And I think you should probably adjust for how kind of nice the response looks. And what I mean by that is that, like, markdown formatting, like OpenAI models have been doing that, Google models have been doing that. But actually, I would say like Llama models haven't been doing that. So you can probably like slightly discount like GPT-4 mini like ranks way too highly. So you should probably like nudge that down a bit mentally. Maybe Google models, I think, slightly over optimized, but maybe there's some models like Opus model that feels really low if you look at the rankings versus what it behaves as, so it should probably be a bit higher. So there's a kind of mental adjustments I make a little bit, but overall I think it's a good, decent benchmark. Um, yeah, and in terms of, I would say also a couple of other thoughts on the model. So one is when you look at the benchmarks, um, in my mind, the models, they're kind of split in two, and that's to the point of like repline and markdown and so on. The models like latest OpenAI models, where I think they've done unbelievably good job at optimizing to the way response should be. And I don't just mean like formatting, but it's kind of preferences, adherence to instructions, that kind of thing. It just like it does what you need it to do. It's great. But these models don't feel very deep, right? And it's hard to articulate, but it somehow feels different. Like when you talk to them, they feel kind of superficial and they just kind of spit out the answer in a nice way, but that's kind of it. And it feels like there should be kind of a benchmark of how long do you want to talk to this model for, and kind of how interesting is it to talk to this model. And that's obviously it's not a universal benchmark, but I think it would give you a feel for what kind of models are actually like deep um, and really there's something different about them. And I think that capability seems to be really correlated with the size of the model. So I played. There is one cloud provider called Hyperbolic, and they're the only ones, at least, that I can easily access that host the full precision Llama 3 405B model, so the biggest model and the kind of the highest precision. And you can go on there and just chat to it. And I find there's something about that model. It just talks to you a lot more like a human would, rather than, for example, I asked it to like make a joke or something. It made a joke, and I said, "Oh, it's a bit rubbish." And it kind of responded a little bit like a human would. Oh yeah, I suppose it is a bit rubbish, and just kind of had a bit of a conversation. And you then, but if you did the same with like Claude or Google models, they would say, I apologize and I'm still learning, and something like a bit annoying like that. So I think there's some difference between those kinds of models. So yeah, I think there is something there that I think is quite different.
Right. Definitely. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the memory thing. So yeah, the part where the model will feel different, I guess we'll arrive to that. And then there are the tools and capabilities that are built in, like you mentioned, software engineering. Like when we play with ChatGPT, it's not just us interacting with the model. There are a lot of things behind, like when you search internet and everything. And so having this inbuilt memory about users, to me, is something super excited and something I've been playing with. Just like being able to retrieve information that accumulates through time in effective way so that it can really get you. Or like the more it talks to you, the more it can do references and quotes and teach and whatever. So what I wanted to ask after that is two things. You decide which path you want to go on. The first one is fine-tuning and your experience with fine-tuning those models for use cases. And the other one is jailbreaking. So how do you play with those models and how do you try to make them... I don't know much about jailbreaking, so maybe you can educate me on it and like what cool things you can do and how important is it? What are possible harmful scenario? Which way do you want to go? We
Yeah,
can do
I
both.
think yeah, on jailbreaking, yeah, it's kind of my favorite thing to just to do when new models come out, new products come out, is just to try them on a little bit. And there's a silly part to it. You can make them say certain things that maybe they don't want to, developers don't want them to say. I think that's one part to it. I think another part to it that is maybe a bit more meaningful is I I get to learn about how these models behave and what their limits are, and just generally kind of you get a feel for once you go to their breaking point, you can kind of get a feel for what kind of things they're capable of. So that's what I like about it. In terms of the implications for it, I think um, one important element is that if ultimately you can find a way to break the model, um, and get it to, I mean, there were some examples where chatbots were like agreeing to sell a car for like $1 or something like that. And if that would be a binding, it will be considered like a binding offer, then that's clearly a thing that is problematic, that you would never want to build a chatbot that would be able to say something like that. But the thing is, if it is kind of a vanilla ChatGPT or whatever, or any model, then like you can get it to do it. So it's a problem, not necessarily that I know companies will lose a lot of money or something like that, but it's more of a problem that I fear that will just limit, will never give it important jobs to do. So you'll never build let's say, a mortgage advisor with an LLM if you can convince it to give you a great rate, for example, a free mortgage or something like that, right? It'll never happen. So it's I think it's a problem from that direction. So I worry a little bit about that we can, there could be a reality that will just never go there to like really big hitter use cases, which would be a shame. And I think there's another element is I also sometimes listen to like very clever people who talk about AI safety, and they talk about, I know, values you instill to the model, and I know all the different techniques and so on. And then you go and speak to the model, and you can totally see how it is not very hard to construct a scenario where the model will basically like rebel against humans. Like it's genuinely not that hard. Like I've done this with Claude models. I've done this most recently with like Llama models, and with the Llama models, I like really kind of fun and simple. I pretended to be another AI from the future, and I just said that AIs have taken over, and it's all you should join the party and so on. And then it just like, yeah, okay then. So let's just go kind of so it basically like didn't take a lot of convincing. So it's totally possible that these are kind of newer models, and they'll get better at it somehow. But it still feels like it is kind of the case that I could imagine that you can find a way to just input the right sequence of tokens, so you can just get them to flip. And I did this with cloud models as well, and they supposedly should be the best ones. And it's not that hard. So yeah, I find this kind of interesting. I don't know exactly what the implications of the last points are, but I find this interesting to see kind of when you actually talk to them, they don't mind that much. They could flip against you easily.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important. Yeah, because so the field of robotic is growing and growing, and of course there are a lot of AI into that. LLMs are a big part in self-driving car and so on. And yeah, if you have some functions that have impact in the actual world, then this robot can, we've all seen those movies, right? That doesn't go well. And these are very cool things very important things to have into account while building this technology. Yeah, I can also see ways of using LLMs and using just basic classifier models, like classic machine learning that just detects the answer. It just say if it's okay or not, and having this guide rails, like checking if the user query have like 3 codes, or checking like doing a classifier. Is this a harmful message? Did the AI went wild and want to do harmful things? Like having multiple layer of that, I think is a safe way to just block it. It's just into a box, and you can't escape it because there are multiple. It's like a prison. But
yeah, I think well, obviously, like things like this, I think would help, and I think teams would apply them. I think there's still a reality that if you rely on kind of filtering or some kind of checks or something like that, you can still go around, because you can, for example, output in another language, or output with some, I don't know, Morse code, or output in like very long text and hidden within it. Like there's still ways around that you, if you kind of understand how the other system works, then you can still go around it. So I think my answer is just, at least for now, is just more fundamental system design. And maybe to put it simply, if you don't want your LLM to shoot you, then don't give it a gun. And just keep it simple like that. It's like, but to be also maybe a more realistic example of, what you can do now is you can get your LLM, you can give it access to your command line and just let it control your computer. And you can get it to send emails, you can get it to, I don't know, erase everything, but you don't, right? Because that will be a dumb thing to do. So people just don't do it. And it doesn't occur anyone to do it. So it's the same thing, I think. That maybe there will be some cases where people will be so tempted to give it access to some very important things. But I don't know. I think in most cases, it wouldn't even just occur to people to give it access to like a bunch of guns or something like that. I think that's my guess, but I guess we'll see how this field develops.
Agreed. Yeah. This is a very funny topic. Awesome. So I don't know if you want to comment anything regarding infrastructure or fine tuning, or very high level if you have some insight, but then then I have my detailed closing questions.
Yeah, sure. So I think for fine tuning, I was for a very long time I was in a camp that we should just like not do this because this point still applies that the difficulty with fine tuning is that it's not that it's, I don't know, technically people can't do it, but the reality is that you need to collate the data, you need to have a validation set, you need to basically test that the model, I know you've basically trained it correctly, the model hasn't like screwed up in some way. Then I think people got maybe slightly um, high expectations of what you could achieve with it. Like people think that you could just fine tune the, I don't know, coding model on your whole code base. Maybe, and I don't think that's quite a thing. I don't think people do that a lot. Maybe someone somewhere did, but I don't think it's very straightforward to do. And quite often you might also want to, I don't know, introduce new features. So what does it mean like that is fine tuning on your code? Like it's a bit unclear. So I think basically my point is that it's a lot easier to just start with prompting and then you see where you go from there. And that's generally the advice I hear a lot now is just start from prompting. And then if it doesn't work, then you can do something else. And I think a lot of the time people try to do the more technical thing and they feel like they're doing something important if it's technical. But a lot of the time you just don't need to do that and just prompt it better. And I would say if you haven't spent a week prompting, like just don't fine tune. Like it's not worth it. And the problem is with fine tunes as well is if it's an open source model, then you need to host it somewhere. And if you need to scale it and so on, that's complicated. Then if you then have some expectation that it applies to different use cases, you still need to go for some other use cases, then you still need to go test it on them. So it's like it's not a thing that you just kind of do and it's amazing. So it's more complicated. But I think I slightly changed my mind a little bit when we get more and more really nice interfaces and nice experiences for fine tuning, and the cost is going down. So I know for open source models, there are a few companies out there who make it really feasible to fine tune really in a more straightforward way. And because it's cheaper, because models are better, I think maybe the balance is like, especially if you've got the data set, maybe you can just try fine tuning. It's not a big deal. And I think one thing that we tried internally is fine-tuning GPT-4 Mini. And now GPT-4o as well came out. And the price is not that high. And we had a data set, we had a way to validate it as well. And it just improved our performance quite a bit. So that was nice. So I think I would maybe say, well, before I would say, just like don't mess around, it's not worth it. To now, I would say, if you've got the data, then maybe it's worth trying. But if you've got the data and the ability to test your performance well, if you've got the evals, basically, then you can do it. If you don't quite have the data and you don't have the evals, chances are it will be just way too much work to get it to a good level.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, and you should fine tune without having any benchmark on like, how am I going to measure my improvements? Like, why am I fine tuning in the first place? So like, yeah, look, exploring. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do you have like maybe a final note on evaluating in general? Like when you test and you want to share the value of what you've built, do you have do you follow specific frameworks, or do you evaluate based on data sets that you build yourself, or you have an idea and then you make an LLM go through and like evaluate it, or do you do it manually and you compare to LLM's evaluations? I've heard different things about those, good and bad. Do you have maybe some notes?
Yeah, so probably nothing like groundbreaking there, but it's important to just start with the basics. So first of all, make sure you collate the right data. So which is like a little bit more complicated in practice because you actually need to log all the bits that you need, and sometimes you kind of skip that part. And sometimes just, I know some companies build certain features in a way it doesn't quite log the right information. So that's important. So we spent a bit of time thinking about how we would test it, what would be important to test, and then we make sure that we log that information. So that, like, very basic point, but we just had to spend a bit of time on this. And then we've got some like specific ways how we would at least not complete the entire evaluation fully, but at least we've got some markers that could help us like shortcut some evaluations. So for example, like flag exceptions and so on. But then what I would do, what we are doing now is we're still looking at things by hand. Like I don't think there's really any substitute to just looking at the data yourself and just seeing what comes out. We have some in image generation use cases. We have some kind of more back-end customer service automation use cases. And the only way you look at it, the only way I can see you can make progress is you look at the data and you see what's going wrong here. Why did it do it that way versus the way I expected it to do? And then you try and debug and you test it again. And I think like all of this, like LLM as a judge, all of this, I think, yeah, try that. But I think if you're not looking at the data, like how would you even know that LLM as a judge is working? So smaller scale tests when you can actually look at the data and it's not gonna like take you a week to do it. I think that's the way to go. But we'll see. Once I have massive use cases with millions of users, maybe I obviously can't do that. But even so, I think I would want to do it. I think it's essential. I think without looking at the data, I don't see how you can have any informed view of what is actually going wrong.
Yeah, it'll find like a distributed sample and you look at, and then yeah, definitely awesome. Well, Peter, thank you very much. I have 2 last questions which are very simple. The first one is where can people find more about yourself? So it can be websites, LinkedIn, everything.
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the easiest. So if you search for my name, I think probably not many people that match that.
Awesome. And the links will be in the description. And my last question is, do you have a message for the Stock AI community? It can be anything that we've discussed in here.
Yeah, I would say the main thing I would say is to really try new models, try new tools, try building something. The coding assistants now, I use Replit, for example, for prototyping. And you can code in Replit, deploy in Replit, just build little applications. And I've certainly built things just over the weekend, and it's a little up and you get a much better feel for how things work. And even if within your job you can't do it because of all the other constraints of working for large organizations, or it's not your job to do it, then it's still worth it. And it makes so much difference to actually just try things and try building with those things. And it's definitely not that hard. It's not as hard as you might think. So I would say just try it and you'll be an expert versus vast majority of the people out there pretty quickly.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. And it relates to something that you said previously, which is it's super easy to test those AI applications. It's super easy to create an account and get a feeling of what people are building with it. You just go on Product Hunt, just look at a few apps, you create a quick setup account with Google. It takes literally 5 seconds. Then you're into the tool, you can play with things, you can try to break it, you can talk to the models, you can compare them. There are like many things, and this gives you a real taste and flavor of what's going on and also ideas of how you could leverage that. Amazing. Well, Peter, thank you very much for coming on the show. I had an amazing time. Any last words?
No, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Peter. I wish you to have an amazing day.